starting at verse 14. It says, "But when they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. And after the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent to them, saying, Men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. Then Paul stood up in motion with his hand and said, Men of Israel, and you who fear Elohim, listen." But we see in verse 15 that it says on the Shabbat day that the reading of the law and the prophets were going on the Shabbat in verse 15 of Acts 13. This is why we read the law and the prophets on the Shabbat. And of course, all the other texts. We're in the book of Acts now. But this is what happened on the Shabbat days. And if we go to the verse 42, in this same Acts chapter 13, it says, "So when the Jews went out of the synagogue, the Gentiles begged that these words might be preached to them the next Shabbat, the next Sabbath." So it says the Gentiles begged, preach that again on the next Sabbath. They begged to hear the word of Yah on the next Sabbath. Verse 43, "Now when the congregation had broken up, many of the Jews, devout and proselytes, followed Paul and Barnabas, who speaking to them persuaded them to continue in the grace of Elohim. On the next Sabbath, almost the whole city came together to hear the word of Elohim." We just saw in verse 14 and 15 that they were hearing the law and the prophets. This is the book of Acts. They didn't have a New Testament. Okay? They did not have a New Testament when this book of Acts was being lived out. The book of Acts wasn't active when their actions were being lived out in this book of Acts, right? So when he says in verse 44, on the next Sabbath, almost the whole city came together to hear the word of Elohim. Genesis to Malachi, the law and the prophets. Acts chapter 13, verse 15. The law and the prophets. The whole city came out to hear the law and the prophets on the next Shabbat, including the Gentiles, right?